In this video, we're going to learn how to add authentication to our SvelteKit application using Supabase. We're going to learn how to register new users, log in users, and log out users. We're also going to learn how to take advantage of both the client and the server using some progressive enhancement. I hope you're as excited as I am about this video. These are two amazing technologies, and bringing them together just makes them that much better. As always, links to the starting and final code can be found in the video description. And without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. All right, so obviously the first thing that we need to do is set up a new Supabase project. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that now. All right, so while the database is being set up, we can go ahead and set up our project in VS Code. You can start out where I am today by just cloning the repository that I've linked in the description. It has some preset styles. It has the forms already built. We just don't have any of the actual code needed to make this work added yet. So we have a .env.example here. And as you can see, we have public Supabase URL and public Supabase anon key. So we can actually get those, and it looks like my database is done. So let's actually go ahead and get those now. So if we go to project settings here, then we go to API, we're going to see that we have the project URL and the anon public key. So we'll copy these over. So let me actually just, first of all, copy these keys here. I'm going to make a new file inside of the root called .env. I'm going to paste in those keys, and then I'm going to copy the URL from here, and then the anon key from here. All right, so now we have these here ready to go. The next thing we need to do is we need to actually install two libraries here. One of them is going to be the Supabase JavaScript SDK, and then the other one is going to be the Supabase auth helpers for SvelteKit library. So let's go ahead and install both of those. And then now we can go ahead and just run our app for the time being. So we can just start our application. We'll minimize the terminal for now. And the first thing we need to do is come into our source folder. We're going to make a new directory called lib. And then within that, we're going to make a file called supabase.ts or .js if you're using JavaScript, okay? This is where we're actually going to create our Supabase client that we'll be able to use across our application. So the first thing we need to do is we need to import create client from Supabase auth helpers SvelteKit. And then we need to import our environment variables that we just set up. So we have public Supabase anon key, and we also have public Supabase URL. And those are going to come from $env/static/public. We can then create our Supabase client with create client, and then we need to pass in the URL first and then the anon key. And then to actually make sure this client is initialized on both the server and the client whenever the application runs or whenever we hit our server, we actually want to create a hooks.server.ts as well as a hooks.client.ts. And all we have to do for the time being is we're just going to import lib/Supabase into both of these files. Okay, so once that's done, we can actually close all of these for the time being. And we're going to come into our routes and we're going to go into our layout. Okay. And within this file, we're going to set up a subscription to the Supabase auth state, which will allow us to take action when a change in auth state occurs, such as a user logging in or a user logging out. And speaking of subscriptions, don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. I'm trying to hit 1 million subscribers by the end of the year. I know it's a tough goal, but I think we can get there. So thank you so much, and back to the video. So we're going to come into our script tags here, and let me switch this to lang equals ts because I'm running TypeScript right now. And we'll set up an on mount. And I'm going to say const data, and then we're going to take out subscription equals Supabase client.auth.onAuthStateChange. And then we're going to invalidate all, which we need to import from app/navigation. And then what we need to do next is we actually need to go underneath of this and say return subscription.unsubscribe. So now our root layout, which is loaded on every single page, is now monitoring the state of our authentication so that it will know if something changes. We're going to invalidate all, and I will demonstrate this here in just a bit, okay? Now, the next thing that we're going to do is we're actually going to create a plus layout.server.ts or JS. And what this is going to allow us to do is it's going to allow us to pass the session, so the user session, to the client, okay, from the server side. And we can do that if we set up a load function here. So it's going to be a layout server load, and it's just going to take in an event, and it's going to return session, which is going to be await getServerSession, which is going to come from Supabase auth helpers. And we're going to pass in the event. So what this is going to do is it's going to pass session to the rest of our application, right? Because this is the root layout. And if you're familiar with how loading works in SvelteKit, this session will be available on every subsequent page's page data. Okay, so we can always check to see if this session exists, right, on the client side. So now what we'll do, we'll go ahead and close out of this for the time being. This is all we needed from here. And then we're going to go into our hooks.server.ts, and we're actually going to set up the handle function, and we're going to say export const handle, which is going to be of type handle if you're using TypeScript. It's going to be asynchronous, and it's going to take in an event and resolve. And then what we're going to do is we're actually going to get the session and the Supabase client from the Supabase auth helper. So what we can do is we can say const and destructure here the session and the Supabase client, which is going to try to import this, but that's not what we want. We're going to say equals await getSupabase, and we're going to pass in the event. And we need to import getSupabase from those auth helpers here. Okay. And then what we're going to do is we're going to set event.locals.sb equal to Supabase client. And we're going to set event.locals.session equals to the session. And then what we can do is we can just simply return resolve event. And what this is allowing us to do is it's going to give us access to the Supabase client on every single load function, right? Server load function, as well as the session, right? So some of the Supabase documentation shows running, await getSupabase on every single load function. But what we can do is we can actually just run it here in the hook and then have access to it really easily throughout the rest of our server side load functions, as well as the actions themselves. Okay, and we'll see this in a second. Now you'll notice here, if you're using TypeScript, you're going to have a little squiggly line here. So we can go ahead and fix that by heading to our app.d.ts. And then what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to declare global here because I have some issues if I don't do this. And then for locals, I'm going to uncomment this out. And again, if you're not using TypeScript, you can completely ignore this stuff. This does not have any impact on how your application works. Okay. So we'll say SB is going to be a typed Supabase client, and session is going to be session, which is going to come from Supabase or null. And then for page data, if you recall, we're returning that session here in the layout server load. So if we want to actually have type safety on the page data session, we can say session import at Supabase Supabase.js.session or null. So now if we look at our hooks, we're not going to have those squiggly lines anymore, and we do have type safety here. Okay. Now let's go ahead and take a look at our application and see what we have going on. So if we go to localhost 5173, we have an internal server error. So we can see here that it cannot find the import. So let me go back into my layout.server, and I actually need to make this say $lib/Supabase, and that should be good to go. Okay, awesome. So let's check out our application and see what we have going on over here. We can see that we just have a very simple page here. Let's learn how to register and log in users. If we click login, we get brought to a login page. If we click register, we get brought to a register page. So before we actually set up registration, what we need to do is we actually need to go into our Supabase dashboard here, and we actually need to go to authentication, URL configuration, and we need to change the site URL from localhost 3000 to localhost 5173. Click save. And then we'll also update the redirect URLs as well. So we'll just say localhost 5173. And this is going to make sure that the emails, whenever our authentication emails come to our email addresses, that they redirect us back to the proper site. Okay. Obviously, once you deploy this, you're going to want to make sure this is something else, whatever the actual domain name of your application is. All right, now let's go back into our application. I'm going to minimize the terminal and close out of this. All right, so now we can go into our registration route here and start to make sure that we get all of this set up. So the first thing, we can see that we have just two inputs here. We don't actually have much going on. We just have a name is email, name is password, and we have the type of text and type of password, and we have a button. Okay, we don't have the action set up. So let's go ahead and set that up here. So we're going to call this action !/register. So the action is going to be called register, and we'll set up the method to be post. And then within our page.server, we can use kit actions. And this is part of the Svelte for VS Code extension. There's some snippets they added. So kit action just adds the action object for you, which is pretty nice. We're going to say register. It's going to be asynchronous. And we're going to take in request and locals. And then we're going to go ahead and get the form data from the form and convert it into an object. And if you're not familiar with how form actions work, please go watch my form actions video. It'll definitely help out with understanding this a bit better. So we can say const body equals object.fromEntries await request.form data. So whatever is submitted in that form, we're going to convert it into an object here. And then what we can do is we can say const data and error, and we're actually going to rename error to error. And this is because this name is going to conflict with SvelteKit's error. So if we want to throw an error, we won't be able to if it has the same name as this, okay? And then we'll say equals await locals.sb, right? So locals.sb, if you recall from our hooks, is that Supabase client. So we don't have to run this on within every single action and every single load function. We can just access it here, locals.sb, and this only lasts for the duration of that request. So as soon as this request goes away, locals is cleared. The next request comes in, hits the hook, generates the session, generates the client, and that's how that works. Okay, that's the life cycle of the hooks. So we can do .auth, and if you notice, if you're using TypeScript, we have type safety here because we added that to our app.d.ts, and we can do .signup. And what we're going to need is we're going to need an email. So we can use body.email. And then we also need a password. So we can use body.password. And we're going to get some TypeScript errors. So we can just do as string for each of these. And that's just because each of the objects on the body are going to be a form data entry value rather than a string that this is expecting. So quick band-aid there. And then what we can do is we can check if there's an error. So we can say if error. Then we can say if error instance of auth API error, which is going to come from Supabase, and the error.status is equal to 400. Then we want to return fail. And if you're not using the latest version of SvelteKit, they replaced invalid with fail. Okay, so make sure that you're using the latest version if you're having issues with this syntax. Okay, and then what we can do is we can just pass an error message here. We'll just say invalid email or password. And then otherwise, we'll just return a failure again, and we'll say 500. The error is going to be a server error. Please try again later. So what we're doing here is if it's an issue with the auth API, so basically if they try to log in with an email that is invalid, or if they try to sign up with an email that's invalid or a password that doesn't meet our minimum requirements, they would get this message here, and it would be a status code of 400, which is a validation error. And then anything else would be some type of server error or network error communicating with the server. So in this case, we'll just return that it's a server error. And then if everything else is good to go, we'll just throw a redirect to 303 status code to the home page. Okay, now before we actually register a user, what I want to do is I want to have some type of way of knowing if I did in fact register that user properly and everything's working. So let's go into our page.svelte here, and we'll open up some script tags. I have a snippet set up for the script tags here. But what we're going to do is we're going to definitely take in page data, right? And the page data that we're looking for is going to be coming from the layout.server, right? So we're looking for this session here, okay? Because remember, if the session is not valid, this can either be a session or it can be null. And basically, if the user is not logged in or they don't have an active session, it's going to be null, okay? So we can use that to our advantage when we go to check things here in a second. So what we can do is we can come underneath this H1 here, and we'll just say if data.session, and we'll do an else. So everything else will go here. So basically, if there's a session, we're going to do something different. If there's not a session, we want to show the login and register buttons, okay? So if there is a session, let's just set up a p tag with welcome, and then we'll say data.session.user.email. So now we should be able to test out our application here. If we go into our app and we go to register, and let's just try to sign up with a little test email I have here. And I click register, you'll see that we were in fact redirected to the home page, right? Which means that within our action here, we didn't have an error. And then if we go back to Supabase and we check our authentication panel here, we'll see that we have a new user created and it's waiting for verification. So I can verify that email here real quick. And you can see that I was redirected back to the application. And now it says, welcome irishhoneybyte@gmail.com. So now it knows that we are currently logged in as this user. So now let's go ahead and set up a logout route really quick so we can log out and then log back in, and we can set up the login piece. So we'll create a new route called logout, and it's just going to have a plus server.ts or .js. And we can use the same snippets here. We can do kit endpoint. We'll change this from a get to a post. It's going to be of type request handler if you're using TypeScript. And we're going to take in locals. And what we're going to do is we're going to say const error as error equals await locals.sb.auth.signout. And then we can say if error, then we want to throw an error. So we can say throw error, which is going to come from SvelteKit. It'll be a 500. Something went wrong logging you out. And then if there isn't an error, we're just going to throw a redirect, which is new in the latest version of SvelteKit, which allows us to throw redirects from our endpoints, and we'll just redirect them to the home page. Okay, so now we can actually go back into our root page.svelte here, and we can add in that logout form. So we'll just set up a form here. The action is going to be to /logout without the question mark because it's an endpoint. The method is going to be post. And then within that form, we're just going to have a button with a type of submit and a class of button primary. And we'll say logout. Okay, and we can test this out by coming back to our application and then just clicking on the logout button. You'll see that we got redirected to the home page. Now we have this login and register button showing here again. So now let's go ahead and log back in. But in order to do so, we need to actually set up our login form. So let's go ahead and do that now. So we'll come back into VS Code and we can kind of close out of everything for the time being. We're going to go to the page.server.ts of our login page and we'll say kit actions. And then we'll need to import this type in here. And this action is going to be called login. It's going to be asynchronous, of course. It's also going to take in request and locals, very similar to the register action. We'll again do the same thing. Object.fromEntries await request.form data. And then we'll have const data and error as error equals await locals.sb. Whoops, I actually spelled locals wrong up here. So locals.sb.auth.sign in with password. It's going to take in an email, which is going to be body.email as string again, and password, body.password as string. And then again, we can run those same error checks. So if error is an instance of auth API error, and the status is 400, you want to return a fail, invalid credentials. Let's import fail here. And then otherwise we'll return a generic fail with 500. We'll say server error, try again later. And then if all works, we're just going to throw a redirect back to the home page. Okay, so inside of our page.svelte, we actually need to add that action here. So we'll do !/login. Method will be post. Then we can add type of submit to this button here. And now we should be good to go. So let's go ahead and try to log in with that email or with that user we just created. And as you can see, we are now logged in. But now you're probably asking yourself, okay, everything we're doing is on the server side. How do we do things on the client side if JavaScript is available and if we should decide to do so? So let's go ahead and run through a scenario real quick. And that's going to be to log out with progressive enhancement. So what we can do is we can actually go to our homepage here where we have our logout button. And what we're going to do is we're going to set up progressive enhancement to log out the user, right? We want to make sure everything else still works as expected, that the data is getting invalidated, meaning we don't have a session, right? So that we should get redirected back to the home page with the two buttons showing there, login and register. So let's go ahead and set that up. So what we're going to do is we're going to set up a submit function here, which is going to get passed into our use enhance. So this can be a type submit function if you're using TypeScript. This is going to take in cancel only here. It's going to be asynchronous. And then what we're going to do is we're going to say const error equals await Supabase client, which we actually need to import from lib/supabase.auth.signout. And we can check if error, then we'll just console log the error for the time being. But we could obviously handle this with a toast or something else if you wanted to. And then we'll say cancel. So we won't actually even submit this to our server at all. So now we need to come out here to our form for logout. We say use enhance. Make sure we import that from app/forms. And then we'll just pass in this submit logout function here. Okay, so what should happen now is when we log out, it should call this function here, right? What's going to happen is our layout.svelte is currently subscribed to the auth.onAuthStateChange, right? Which is going to call this callback when an auth event happens. And that callback is going to say invalidate all, which if we read here, causes all load functions belonging to the currently active page to rerun, which in this case is the root layout, which means it's going to invalidate this layout load here, which is in turn going to re-trigger this await get server session, which is then going to set session to null, right? So if we're logging out, session should become null. And we can check that these things are actually happening. So let's just set a console log here. We could say ran layout load. And then we can also set up a console log in here. We can say auth state change detected. Okay, and then we can open up our console here on the right so we can kind of monitor this. And then we can go back into our browser here, and we'll also open up the console here. So if we click on log out, we're going to see that the auth state change detected. And if we come back to our application here, we can see that it ran the layout load. So even though inside of our submit function here, we actually didn't reload the page, we actually canceled the form submission, right? So had this subscription not been in play on our layout, the page, the data would never have reloaded from this load function, meaning the session would still be valid or it would still exist, which would also mean that we wouldn't have this login and register button here. We would actually have the welcome user email address here, okay? So this same thing can be applied to other form actions as well. You can use the clients, for example, inside of logout, we would just define a submit function here, run the same functions that we're running here on the client side, and then cancel the request. What's nice about this is if we log back in, and let's just say that, again, for example, a user did not have JavaScript, and we click on logout, we'll see that it still works the same way, right? That's the beauty of progressive enhancement, is that by default, if the JavaScript is enabled, it's going to run that function that we have set up on our page.svelte here. But if not, then it's going to just execute the form action as expected to /logout, which is going to have the same result. So if you want to learn more about use Enhance, I just created a video on that a couple of days ago. Please go check that out. There's some good information in there that you definitely don't want to miss out on. And that is going to conclude this video on setting up authentication with SvelteKit and Supabase. If you like this content, if you'd like to see anything more with Supabase, please let me know in the comments down below. If you got value out of this video, don't forget to like and subscribe. It greatly helps out the channel and it's 100% free. If you have any questions about this setup, we have a Discord server with over 200 members and we're growing every single day. So definitely come join the Discord, ask your questions. Everyone's always willing to help. And if nothing else, I will see you all in the next video.